got your back, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so to the extent you want to set a good example, I will ask you to socially distance as you feel appropriate.
With masks.
With masks, so yeah. So if we're all set, it's almost 1 o'clock. I think, Ryan, we can get going.
You're good.
Jeez.
Timely.
And the wind comes up. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for I've been covered in worse things, believe me. That's better. Thank you, Emily. Well, good afternoon again. Thank you for making this a priority for you. My name is Brian Moran. I'm the United States Attorney for the Western District of Washington. And I want to start off by thanking our host, the Kent Police Department, in particular Chief Padilla, the mayor, who was very graciously welcomed us, and indeed the entire citizenry of Kent, Washington. What a terrific place to hold something as important as this. I also want to begin by recognizing the law enforcement partners that we have here. There are a large number of them, and the matters that we're going to talk about today, every single one of these departments and many more were represented. So it'd be remiss if I didn't mention them and take a moment to mention them as well. First of all, I want to recommend Drug Enforcement Agent, Special Agent Charge Keith Weis, who's just an incredible partner in the fight that we are fighting and that we're going to talk about today and that is ongoing. We have from the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, our brand new SAC, Jonathan McPherson. Jonathan, would you wave? Right behind me. Welcome to Seattle, Jonathan. Bremerton Police Department, we have Kevin Crane. Bonnie Lake Police Department, Chief Brian Jeter's here. FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, we have Ray Duda, the Special Agent in charge. From the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Director, Jonathan Weiner. Homeland Security Investigations, Eben Roberts. Kent PD, of course, Chief Raf Padilla. I'm surprised that King County Sheriff Hank Neck is unavoidably unable to join us at the last minute, but we have a representative from King County Sheriff's Office. Seattle Police Department, I'm delighted that Chief Diaz, Interim Chief Diaz, is able to join us today. And Snohomish County Sheriff Adam Fortney is with us today. Snohomish Regional Drug Task Force Acting Commander Mark Richardson. Thurston County Sheriff John Snaza. And then two representatives from the United States Marshal Service with whom we work very closely in the United States Attorney's Office, Chief Deputy Rich Craig and Craig McCluskey with the Warrant Supervisor. I have some brief remarks. I'll introduce our key speakers, give you an outline of where I hope we're going to go. We've been in this pandemic for 7 months, and like many across the country, the people in this district, of which I'm privileged to be the United States Attorney, folks have been sheltering in place at times. They've been taking care of social distancing, and their businesses have been impacted. The places they work, the places they run, the opportunities or the businesses they run and the people they employ have all been impacted. But sadly, those who peddle misery in the form of illegal narcotics, fentanyl in particular, have not been in lockdown. They have viewed the pandemic as an opportunity to double down on selling escape, addiction, and far too often the death of our loved ones, our family, our friends, people we care about, our neighbors, and so many in our community. And you'll hear from a family this afternoon about that. Western Washington is not immune from any of the problems that we've seen across the country. If you pay attention to the news, and I suspect most of you do, you'll have seen what I see each and every day, which is a tremendous spike in addiction, but particularly overdose deaths. And a disproportionate number of these overdose deaths are related to the toxic poison that we all have come to know as fentanyl. As I look at the men and women that I'm privileged to stand in front of and so many of their colleagues around the country, and I've been in the prosecution business most of my professional career, well on 25 years. If I've learned anything in this battle that we're fighting to save lives, and that's what it is, it's a battle to save lives, that to be effective, you have to have partnerships. And that's not a partnership in word, that's a partnership in deed. And you have to be mission focused, you have to be collaborative, you have to be collegial, and more importantly than anything, you have to set aside jurisdictional boundaries and work to a common good, a common goal, and for the people that we are all privileged to serve. And I know these are challenging times for our law enforcement community in so many cities around. And I can't tell you, as a United States Attorney, how proud I am to count myself among your numbers. You are indeed the best, the finest that Washington State has in public service. And there are many out there who agree with me, many, many others. Before I turn it over to speakers, I want to mention one other important part of today's events. This morning, I was privileged and honored to again meet with families who've lost loved ones to overdose, primarily fentanyl. We met with five young men and women who passed away because of fentanyl. It was a heartbreaking meeting. I was joined by Special Agent Charge Keith Weis from the DEA, Jonathan Weiner from the High Intensity Drug Task Force area, and most importantly, we had the administrator from the DEA who was unavoidably detained, Tim Shea, and for an hour and a half we listened to these folks. And you'll hear from one of these families, and if I can foreshadow the most important part of today, it's not the statistics or the guns that we seized, or the methamphetamine, or the fentanyl, or the number of pills, or the pill presses, or the number of people we indict or charge locally. What's important is who we're doing it for and why we're doing it. And that's the message I took away from this morning, and that I hope all of my colleagues here today take away as well. Finally, to my law enforcement colleagues, again, thank you for what you do and who you do it for. I'm going to begin by turning this over to the speaker, Keith Weis from the DEA. Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Good afternoon. My name is Keith Weis. I'm the Special Agent in charge for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration Seattle Division. Last name spelled W-E-I-S. While the majority of Puget Sound's populace has been on lockdown posture due to the COVID-19 pandemic, our collective agencies have maintained a vigilant watch of highly organized groups determined to push for profit extremely dangerous narcotics such as methamphetamines, heroin, and the worst of the worst, fentanyl. These drugs have been identified as the greatest threat in our region, and mass distribution is being controlled by transnational criminal cartels that have tentacles that reach from Mexico into the Puget Sound. The dealers of these drugs are responsible for increasing the levels of violence, addiction, and overdose deaths in our communities. Despite the hurdles faced since the start of the pandemic, our investigators and prosecutors steadfastly monitored significant traffickers up and down the Sound and making numerous key interdictions. Such examples were, on May 24th, 54 firearms, 14 of which were stolen, you see here, were seized from a fentanyl dealer with a lengthy record in Kitsap County. On May 28th, the sources of supply to a teenage fentanyl overdose victim were arrested in Whatcom County. On July 13th, our task forces interdicted a shipment of 26,000 fentanyl pills and 2 pounds of heroin that arrived in Lewis County. This armed trafficker had 2 juveniles in his vehicle. However, what's most impressive has been the accelerated enforcement pace over the last 6 weeks, which resulted in 3 major operations being conducted by this law enforcement coalition. These operations were designed to identify, disrupt, dismantle those in command and control of these violent drug trafficking cells. The violence associated with these groups detected included kidnappings, armed assaults, home invasions, murder for hire, weapons trafficking, and of course, distributing the most dangerous drug we face, fentanyl. In just one example, on July 16th, during active operations, our investigators, reacting in the interest of the public safety, followed and thwarted a subject that was hired to conduct a murder who was en route to conduct the violent act against another drug trafficker. At the time of the arrest in King County, the subject was armed with a loaded firearm which was seized. In total, enforcement operations occurring on July 28th, August 5th, and this morning have resulted in more than 64 arrests, along with the seizure of 332 pounds of methamphetamines, 87 pounds of heroin, over 42,000 fentanyl pills, 36 firearms, and over $1.3 million in drug trafficker assets being seized. I bring attention to this map that illustrates more than 57 search warrants throughout the Puget Sound that were conducted as part of Operation Lockdown, as well as the poster boards that you see displayed around us depicting some of the drug and weapon seizures made during these significant investigations. Lastly, this impressive effort to protect the public health and safety is directly attributed to the invaluable collaboration of investigators and prosecutors at the federal, state, and local levels. I want to express my sincerest gratitude and appreciation to all the law enforcement agencies, along with the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Western District of Washington represented here today. For without their unwavering support and professionalism, none of this would have been possible. It's now my pleasure to introduce Chief Rafael Padilla of the Kent Police Department.
Thank you, Special Agent Charge Weis. My name is Rafael Padilla. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Kent. Last name is spelled Padilla. I want to start by recognizing that the gathering of law enforcement leaders that you see before you today is really representative of the long-standing and strong partnerships in law enforcement in Washington State that benefit our communities, and in particular benefit those that have been afflicted by narcotics and the victims of violent crimes associated with narcotics. I want to thank my colleagues, the chiefs, the sheriffs, and the federal law enforcement executives here today for their continuing efforts to foster a culture of cooperation and support that allow us to get the job done. We know that when local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies work together, violent criminals are stopped, drugs and weapons are taken off our streets. So thank you all for that. I also want to take a moment to recognize the courageous women and men, the officers, the detectives, and the special agents who are out there doing the dangerous work of developing these complex cases to stop violent criminal organizations. They put themselves in the company of vile, dangerous criminals who have little regard for life, and they do so because they place the value of protecting their communities and our children above their own personal safety. These law enforcement professionals are mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters, and they're real people, and they are deserving of our support and appreciation. In particular, I want to take a selfish moment here to personally recognize the Kent police detectives, whose efforts, their dedication, and professionalism were the start of one of the major operations we're talking about today. We know that their efforts specifically stopped a murder, an abduction, and other heinous violent crimes, and so I want to point that out for them. Their names and faces will never be publicized, but I thought it was important to highlight that their work actually saved lives. In addition to stopping violence, they seized a large amount of drugs, and in particular, as we've talked about, the lethal drug fentanyl, and many firearms, as you see here. So I want to thank them for what they do and celebrate the fact that we are here because of their efforts, and what they do is important, they are valued, and they are appreciated. So thank you to the investigators. Lastly, today's press conference is a sad but foreboding reminder that violent criminal organizations still exist in our communities. And they're not just in big cities. They're in the suburbs, they're in the small cities and the small towns. And they bring death and destruction everywhere they go. And as we have a national discussion about how to appropriately fund law enforcement, I think that discussion is incomplete unless we also take time to remember the vital role that our brave women and men out there in law enforcement do every day to keep us safe. These men and women do dangerous work, need to have the necessary resources to do their jobs effectively and safely. And any reduction in this support undermines their capabilities and ultimately compromises public safety. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you for your time today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce King County Captain Troy Smith Meyer.
All right, good afternoon. My name's Troy Smithmeyer. I'm a captain with the King County Sheriff's Office. I'm currently assigned to the city of Burien as the operations captain. Today I'll be giving this speech on behalf of Sheriff Johanknick. She couldn't make it. Unexpectedly, something came up there. I want to thank everyone for coming here today and taking time out of their day. So I'll go on with their speech here. I'm pleased that we could partner with the DEA on these important operations and very proud of the contributions of our contract cities, SeaTac, Shoreline, Burien PD, and Metro PD, as well as our TAC 30 SWAT team. These arrests are important because they help to cripple the drug cartels that are peddling poison in our communities. Drugs like heroin and methamphetamines travel the long road from Mexico to the Pacific Northwest and wreak havoc, increasing crime, gun violence, addiction, and overall deaths. Even worse, these drug traffickers are producing pills made to look like Oxycontin, but they really contain deadly amounts of the synthetic painkiller fentanyl. These fakes end up in the hands of our kids, and the consequences are often deadly. There will be no tolerance for this kind of illegal activity. We will continue to work tirelessly to make sure that the greed and indifference of these drug traffickers does not degrade the quality of life of our residents and threaten the health and safety of our children. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Chief Diaz, the Chief of Seattle Police.
I'll wait just a second, and I know that we have a train coming through, so. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Adrian Diaz, the Chief of Seattle Police Department. On a single day earlier this year, 3 men in South King County died of fentanyl-related overdoses. The 2019 school year began with a number of deadly overdoses in Seattle area teens who thought they were taking oxycodone, but instead their pills were laced with fentanyl, fatal levels of fentanyl. It is because of tragedies like this and innocent lives lost that the Seattle Police Department has a responsibility to work with our local and federal partners to ensure that those that are trafficking illegal and deadly substances are brought to justice, but more importantly, to ensure that they're taken off the streets. These joint operations of the past few months have led to dozens of arrests. Pounds of methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine have been seized, and along with thousands of pills likely tainted with fentanyl. But what's more important to count is the amount of lives that are saved. How many parents have been spared the trauma of burying their child? We have lost too many who have had their whole world ahead of them, which is why we're eager to collaborate with our local and federal law enforcement partners to put people preying on our community behind bars. And we're eager to collaborate with the community members to prevent crimes from happening in the first place. All of our partnerships with you, with the community, are vital to re-envisioning public safety together. Thank you for inviting me today, and congratulations on all of this hard work that has been done. I'm sure results like this will save lives. And I'll turn it over to Moran, to U.S. Attorney.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you all. I want to first say a brief few remarks about our next speakers, Aaron and Diane Heinen, who have come from a small town in Idaho, who are incredibly courageous and are going to take the time to talk about the impact. They're going to tell you a story about their son, but it's like so many other sons and so many other daughters. And I was really pleased that the administrator of the DEA was able to tell some of these families today that through the work of not just enforcement, but collaboration with commerce and e-commerce, that great strides are being made to take pill presses, a simple device that can press fentanyl into something that looks like a Percocet and that's completely innocuous. That didn't come from me. That came from listening to family members like those that we're going to hear. It's most important that you hear from Aaron and Di, so I'd welcome you up here.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us here. My name is Aaron Heinen. This is my wife, Diane. We are Cal and Holly's parents. We're from Kendrick, Idaho. It's a small farming community just 35 miles southeast of Pullman, Washington. The day that Cal's younger sister, Holly, Diane, and I found out exactly what had taken our son's life, we immediately made a choice. Holding hands while sitting on his bed, that choice was to be honest and open about his death and why. We wanted Cal's death to save lives. In order for that to happen, we are sharing our story of our beautiful son. From day one, fentanyl has become a household word. We wear wristbands with hundreds of Cal's friends and family saying, "Remember Cal, remember why." One of Cal's greatest dreams was to pursue his career and live in Seattle. After graduating from the University of Idaho, we moved him to Seattle in July of 2019 to follow his love for film and media. Cal passed away from a counterfeit fentanyl-laced pill on November 21st, 2019. He was 23 years old.
We know Cal made a choice to take a pill. What he did not choose was not to wake up again. Our family has been in shock and sadness since we received the phone call as to why Cal is not here with us. Still unimaginable. We've been forced to become educated quickly on this deadly drug, and also, unfortunately, we are not the only family with this tragic story. Our great kid making a choice that held a consequence beyond belief that has brought us all here. Speaking out about the risks of fentanyl, how it has become our story, is now our new path. We didn't choose this. Cal did not choose this. So we continue to tell our story of Remember Cal and to remember why. These people surrounding us today need our help. Without these law enforcement agencies, we would still be lost in the dark. We would like to extend our thanks and gratitude to all the people who have helped guide us on this path with all their hard work and time given to us. The responding Seattle police officers, Ton Midkiff, medical examiner, Kari Hemp with the DEA, U.S. Attorney Brian Moran, Emily Langley with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Jody Underwood with the DEA, and Kevin Kingsley from the WSP. All of these people have shown great concern, care, respect, kindness, and sadness for us and our son Cal. We are grateful for every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Heinen. With that, we'll be happy to take a few questions, and then afterwards, perhaps one-on-one interviews. But any questions? Yeah, I'll repeat the question, then I'll probably pitch that to Keith Weis, the DEA. The question was, can you tell us if this was all part of one organization and give us sort of the lay of the land of the takedowns that Special Agent Charge Weis mentioned? Is that it? Okay.
That's a great question. So drug trafficking is very compartmentalized. So you have large cartel type groups in Mexico that send up cells, individual cells. So you have cells, sometimes multiple cells in the same area, usually located all across the United States. They're all compartmentalized when they have dealings with a major group, but they're all being sourced out of the same area and not necessarily interconnected with each other. But as we've stated before, the transnational criminal threat is the greatest threat up here in the Puget Sound. These are groups where they are directly communicating with Mexico, having shipments sent up across the southwest border, up into our lower states, southern states in the United States, where they're transshipped up here near into the Puget Sound. And they all are pushing the same types of drugs. So in that way, in a sustained effort, we go out, we identify the most significant groups that we see out there distributing the drugs, the methamphetamine, the heroin, and of course the fentanyl pills like you've heard here described here today. These groups are responsible for moving tens of thousands of pills a month. And it's important for a lot of reasons. Fentanyl, as everyone knows, is about 50 times more dangerous than heroin, or more potent. And it takes as little as 2 milligrams of a dose of fentanyl to create an overdose in a victim. So when you have groups that are moving up tens of thousands of pills, it just takes one pill. And we heard that today from the victims' families. It was all about taking one pill. So when you look at it that way, in a sustained effort, law enforcement, we try to address the threat and take out as many of the main players as we can to try to slow down the flow as it comes in a coordinated effort, slow down the flow where we can give our drug educators, our medical responders, and healthcare professionals the time and space that they need to help people that are severely addicted to these drugs.
Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so can we describe the quantity of meth, and for most of us, 55 pounds of meth, put that in context? Okay. Yeah.
So the quantities that I mentioned previously, so in a sustained effort with the operations over the 6-week period, I think just over 350 pounds of methamphetamine was taken, over 85 pounds of heroin, and over 40,000 fentanyl pills were taken from these groups. It's a lot of narcotics on any given time. It can supply a large user base, obviously, in a wide area. But the more important thing is in these operations was the individuals. We really wanted to isolate, figure out which individuals were most responsible for moving these narcotics. So as we seize narcotics throughout the operations, we're collecting the evidence, putting that together to build the cases against the entire network. So the success here today, really, in my mind, is that command and control elements, people most responsible, the organizers, the managers that are orchestrating these drugs coming up, is really the most important thing at the end of the day, that these people have been put out of business. The narcotics are going to continue to flow. And I say this because there's a large base. It's an economic model. As long as there's a demand for it, you'll have traffickers trying to replace the group that we affected today and over the last several weeks. But hopefully we're a couple steps ahead of them. We're already into the next group. So it's a continual cat and mouse game against the narcotics traffickers. We're well on our way to identifying the next group that are going to be replacing these folks or attempting to replace these folks. But again, these are disruptive operations. We really want to impede the flow and try to have the effect on that.
So I may tag along there, never follow a good answer with a poor answer, but you know, in my career as a county prosecutor and a state court prosecutor, I never saw anything over a pound, ever. And so that's why it's so important that we work collaboratively with the men and women at all levels of law enforcement, because you don't just go out and arrest a 40-pound methamphetamine dealer. You do it by finding a street-level dealer and pulling on a string like so many of the men and women standing behind me do, and pull that string until you get a bigger string, and 10 ounces becomes 2 kilograms, and 2 kilograms becomes 20 kilograms, and that's why this is so important. You never start up here. And let me just answer a question that maybe hasn't been asked. Is this a tip of the iceberg? Absolutely. But as I tell the men and women that I'm privileged to lead in my office, is the problem with being a prosecutor and investigator is there's really no metric as to how many lives you save. But I can assure you of this. We're not going to stop the drug trafficking, but for every fentanyl pill that we take off the street today that's sitting in an evidence locker at DEA, we will have saved lives. That much I know. So we need to focus on how many lives have been saved by these efforts today. Never relax, never give an inch, and go back out, and these folks will do it again tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow's tomorrow. Any other questions? Yeah. You want to take that, Keith? Yeah, describe some of the collateral crimes that we're seeing. Attempted, you said something like attempted homicide and kidnapping and human trafficking and firearm dealing and.
Good question. So these criminal groups are involved and engaged in multiple offenses. Drug trafficking is inherently dangerous and can be violent. You have these groups out trying to collect debts from other dealers that they've dealt with. So, they're engaged in physical assaults on other traffickers. Sometimes there's collateral damage. You have kidnappings where they're trying to hold people for ransom. Rival traffickers may be getting in their way, so they're dispatching people out to go out and actually kill rival traffickers. We had a couple instances where, during our investigations where essentially we detected this action, and to protect public safety, we had to step out and interdict this individual before he was able to commit a serious violent act against another individual. You have home invasions. Traffickers are always out trying to rob other traffickers as well. And then you just have a lot of weapons trafficking in general. We saw narcotics moving across the southwest border in compartmentalized vehicles that moved up here. They're transporting narcotics. We see money and firearms heading back south. So we see a lot of weapons trafficking. So a lot of collateral. There's money laundering violations. You see immigration violations. You see a host of violations that these individuals are conducting. So it really is an organized crime group, really just hell bent on, making profit for what they do.
We have one more question. There we go. Probably should have not taken. Is there? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I think I direct you to the poster board that just went flying in the wind, but that'll give you a kind of a flavor of the South Sound, North Sound, just the area where search warrants were executed.
There's over 57 search warrants executed during that.
57 search warrants, so the greater Puget Sound essentially and beyond. Thank you all very much. I know the men and women will be here to answer any questions. Yeah.